My Life as I Remember It, Chapter 2, Part 1, The Big House in Anthrace. We'll call it Big House. Dad received a promotion to superintendent of the coal mine, and we moved into a large house near the commissary and tipple where his office was located. This house had higher ceilings than the house we just moved from. They were probably 10 feet, and I think the standard height on most of those camp houses was 8 feet. An electrical wire hung from the ceiling in the middle of the room with a light bulb in a socket without a reflective shade. This house was less than 1/4 mile from the old house, and all of our belongings were carried up the road to our new house. It's raining. You can probably hear it hitting on the roof of the car. The house had been vacant most of the summer, and the previous occupants had stuffed paper up the chimney to keep the birds and bats out of the house. When Dad lit a fire, those papers ignited, and flames were shooting out the top of the chimney, making a terrible noise. The first time I heard a jet engine, it reminded me of that chimney fire on moving day in Anthrace. It was a good thing coal was used to heat those houses. If wood had been used in those fireplaces, we would probably have had a creosote fire. Those mining camp fireplaces could not have survived the intense heat that a creosote fire would have produced. So I'm sure that they never burned wood in any of those fireplaces. Dad, being a superintendent, entitled us to have one of the only telephones in Anthrace. It was a large box hanging on the wall with a crank that generated enough electricity to alert the telephone operator in Jellicoe. The 2 large bells atop the thing would make you jump out of your skin when it rang. The telephone operator would say, "Number, please," and she, and it was always a she, would connect you with the party you were calling. If you wanted to make a long-distance phone call, the operator would take all of your information. Sometimes it would be an hour before the operator called back after she had all the connections set up. We were one of the only contacts. We were one of the only contacts with the outside world during the war, and many people used the phone trying to contact relatives in the military. Lots of bad news came through that telephone. After moving into the new house, I started noticing the friction that existed between my mother and Dad. They were always fussing and fighting, and my mother did most of the talking. I can remember Dad being kind of passive when she was in a rage, which was often. I think my mother was jealous of Dad, and she probably had a good reason to be. Dad was a fancy guy, and I think he liked the ladies. I never witnessed these things, but some of my memories of those days points to that conclusion. A few times things would get so bad, Mother would take Betty and me to Black Oak to stay with our grandmother Jeffress in Jellicoe. Once we left Anthrace in a taxi with a driver they called Fatty. Dad would come home from work covered with coal dust, and Mother would have a tub of hot water waiting on him. He would lather up with soap and wash the coal dust away. The thing I remember most is the smell of the soap. It had an unusual smell, and I think it was the Lava brand. Coal dust was everywhere, and you couldn't escape it. I went barefooted most of the time, and my feet were always covered with black coal dust. My mother had a temper, and she would stand up against anyone. The story was told about her chasing after some miners with an iron shovel when they came to our house during a labor dispute. They had some disagreements with Dad and made the mistake of involving my mother, Ruth Jeffress Payne. She always protected us, and I can't ever remember being neglected or hungry. The only unhappy thing was the tension between her and Dad and their never-ending fussing and fighting. Sometimes their feuding would get so bad, I would stand in the corner of the room and cry. I can remember some happy times, but I was always anticipating the next round.